Have you ever wondered why so many men, as they grow older, begin to feel distant from their wives? Not angry, not betrayed, just disconnected? It's a quiet shift, almost invisible at first. There's no big fight, no dramatic fallout, just a subtle erosion, a slow fading of the spark that once felt so alive. It's not about falling out of love overnight. It's something deeper and more dangerous. It's about stagnation. You see, men are wired for challenge, for movement, for forward momentum. We're built to build, to pursue, to conquer. But when the relationship stops evolving, when the shared dreams turn into daily routines and everything starts to feel like it's just standing still, that's when something inside a man begins to break down. Not loudly, but silently. It's not that he suddenly dislikes his wife. It's not even that love disappears. It's that the admiration begins to fade. The inspiration he once felt slowly vanishes. And when a man no longer sees his partner as someone who inspires him, someone who fuels his sense of purpose, he starts to withdraw. First emotionally, then spiritually, and sometimes, eventually, physically. And here's the hard truth. This doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the quiet moments, in the pauses between conversations, in the dinners where there's nothing left to say, in the glance across the room where the sparkle of connection is missing. So the real question isn't, why do men start to dislike their wives? The better question is, why do they stop seeing them as a source of inspiration? And even more importantly, what can we do to stop that moment from ever arriving? Because the truth is, it's not just the relationship that's at risk, it's the man himself. When admiration fades, so does the drive. When inspiration dies, so does the part of him that wants to grow. A marriage without movement becomes a mirror of stagnation, and men, especially those wired for ambition, begin to emotionally check out. But here's the good news. This drift isn't permanent. It's not a death sentence. It's a warning sign, and with awareness, it can be reversed. In this video, we're going to peel back the layers and explore what really causes this slow emotional distance in long-term relationships. We'll break down the psychological truths behind attraction, passion, and the slow erosion of admiration. And most importantly, we'll talk about how to reignite that lost spark, not by chasing excitement elsewhere, but by reconnecting with the purpose, growth, and emotional leadership that every meaningful relationship demands. Because at the end of the day, marriage isn't just about staying in love. It's about staying inspired. And that is a choice. Let's take a moment to talk about something that most people in long-term relationships feel at some point, but rarely admit out loud. It's that quiet shift from excitement to routine, from butterflies to boredom. And if you're feeling it, you're not alone. In the early stages of a relationship, everything is electric. The sound of their voice, the anticipation of a date, the way they laugh at something unexpected. It all feels brand new. Why? Because your brain is wired to respond to novelty. That early connection triggers a rush of dopamine, the same chemical behind ambition, thrill-seeking, even addiction. It's a biological fireworks show designed to bring two people close, fast. But here's what nobody tells you. That dopamine rush doesn't last forever. It's supposed to fade. It's a feature, not a flaw. So what happens when the mystery wears off? When their habits become predictable? When daily life replaces late-night conversations and spontaneous kisses? For many men, that shift feels like something's gone wrong. The passion isn't as intense, and they start to wonder, am I falling out of love? But here's the truth. They're not falling out of love. They're falling out of novelty, and the danger lies in misinterpreting that feeling. Instead of recognizing it as a natural evolution, many assume it means something is broken, that maybe they chose the wrong partner, that maybe something or someone is missing. But the problem isn't the relationship itself. It's the assumption that love should always feel like the beginning. that passion is effortless, that connection is automatic. It's not. Passion isn't something that sustains itself. It's something you cultivate. Think about this. Your brain doesn't register pleasure in isolation. It registers contrast. A warm fire only feels warm if you've been cold. A great meal tastes better when you're starving. The same applies to relationships. If everything becomes predictable, your brain stops firing with excitement. That's why couples who stay connected long-term are the ones who inject intentional contrast into their routine. They travel together, try new things, surprise each other. Learn something new together. They don't wait for excitement to return. They create it. So ask yourself, when was the last time you made an effort to surprise your partner? Not with something expensive or grand, but something thoughtful. Something that says, I still want to discover who you are. Because love doesn't die when the newness fades. It dies when we stop trying. And that's the turning point. Will you let familiarity turn into emotional distance? Or will you use it as a foundation to build something deeper, more intentional, more lasting? You don't need to chase new love to feel alive. You just need to choose to see your current love with fresh eyes, because the real magic isn't in who you fall in love with. It's in who you choose to love again and again and again. Let's talk about something that quietly damages more marriages than any big betrayal ever could: emotional neglect. And the scariest part? It often happens slowly, silently, and unintentionally. When life begins to pile on, careers to build, kids to raise, bills to pay, it's easy to slip into survival mode. Most men, wired to provide and protect, shift into get-it-done mentality. They show up, they work hard, they provide. But here's where the disconnect begins. Being physically present is not the same as being emotionally available. You can be in the same room and still feel miles apart. And this emotional gap? It doesn't happen overnight. It builds gradually. One missed moment, one unspoken feeling, one conversation cut short. Over time, that gap becomes a canyon. The wife begins to feel unheard, unseen. She reaches out, maybe through frustration or what sounds like criticism. But beneath that is a simple, raw message. I miss you. I need you. Unfortunately, many men misread those moments. Instead of hearing a cry for connection, they hear nagging. Instead of leaning in, they pull away. They retreat into work, into hobbies, into silence. And the cycle begins. The more she reaches out, the more he shuts down. The more he withdraws, the louder she becomes. Until one day they're not fighting anymore. They're just emotionally estranged. This cycle isn't about bad intentions. It's about missed cues and misunderstood needs. And the longer it goes unaddressed, the harder it is to reverse. Here's the truth that's hard to swallow. Emotional connection is not automatic. It's not something you set and forget. It needs maintenance, small gestures, honest conversations, a willingness to ask, "How are you, really?" That's the fuel that keeps intimacy alive. And when that intimacy fades, fulfillment doesn't just disappear. It gets redirected, sometimes into overworking, sometimes into screen time or late-night distractions, and in the worst cases, into someone else. Because every human being needs to feel seen. If we don't feel it in our relationship, we start looking elsewhere. But here's the good news. Emotional distance isn't permanent. It's a signal, not a sentence. And if you're willing to recognize the cycle, you can break it. Ask yourself, when was the last time you sat down and truly listened, without fixing, without defending, without rushing away? When was the last time you let your partner into your inner world? Because emotional presence isn't just about hearing, it's about making your partner feel heard. And that is the difference between roommates and soulmates. In the next section, we'll look at the silent force that deepens this divide even further. The hidden layers of resentment that build when that emotional disconnection goes unspoken. But, for now, let this be your reminder. Connection doesn't just happen. It's created, intentionally, daily, quietly, and in the smallest of ways, it can begin again, even today. There's a silent danger that creeps into many long-term relationships, not with a loud bang, but with a slow fade. It's called emotional drift, and it's responsible for more loneliness in marriage than we care to admit. The problem often starts with an illusion. We've been fed this idea, by movies, TV, social media, that love should always feel electric, that if it's real, it should be exciting, spontaneous, full of passion and butterflies. But here's the truth, that kind of constant thrill is not love, it's infatuation, it's the honeymoon stage. And while it's beautiful, it's not built to last forever. Real love doesn't die when the excitement fades. It evolves. It matures into something deeper, into trust, commitment, shared dreams. But if you believe that love should always feel like a romantic highlight reel, you'll start to question your relationship the moment things get routine. That's when emotional drift begins, slowly, quietly. You stop asking questions. You stop reaching out. You stop sharing your inner world. And without even realizing it, you start living side by side, but not together. You become teammates, not soulmates. The danger is that this drift doesn't announce itself. It shows up in missed glances, in shallow conversations, in the silence that fills the space where connection used to live. But here's where it gets real. Just like a body weakens without exercise, relationships weaken without effort. Intimacy doesn't maintain itself. It requires work, not grand gestures or fancy date nights, though those are nice, but the small daily acts that say, I still see you. I still choose you. This is where intentional engagement comes in. Men, especially, need to understand that emotional presence is not automatic. You have to decide, every single day, to stay engaged, to stay curious, to lean in when it would be easier to check out. Ask yourself, when was the last time you really looked at your partner and wondered what they've been thinking about lately? What's been weighing on their heart? What's lighting them up right now? Those questions matter. They're the difference between drifting apart and growing closer. Long-term intimacy isn't built on passion alone. It's built on presence, on choosing to care even when you're tired, on asking one more question when silence would be easier, on reaching for your partner even when you don't feel the fireworks. Because love isn't something you fall into once, it's something you fall into again and again, by choice, by attention, by effort. Emotional drift is not inevitable, it's preventable, but only if you stay awake in your relationship. Only if you're willing to show up, not just physically, but emotionally. And if you do, you won't just preserve your relationship, you'll deepen it. You'll create something richer, stronger, more real than fleeting passion ever could. The next part, we'll explore how admiration and the slow loss of it can change the way a man sees his partner and himself. There's something that creeps into many marriages, not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, like water seeping into the foundation. It's resentment, and when left unspoken, unaddressed, and unnoticed, it can erode even the strongest love. Resentment doesn't start with a dramatic argument. It begins quietly, with a need unmet, a feeling ignored, a sacrifice unrecognized. One moment might not seem like a big deal, but when those moments stack up over weeks, months, and years, something heavy starts to form beneath the surface. For many men, the root of resentment lies in silence. Society has conditioned men to be strong, to bear burdens without complaint, to provide, fix, protect. And while those traits are admirable, they come with a cost when they silence a man's emotional needs. He might feel invisible in his own home, Not because his wife doesn't care, but because somewhere along the way, he stopped speaking up, and she stopped seeing the signs. Maybe he feels like nothing he does is ever quite enough. Maybe his efforts are expected but never appreciated. Maybe he's tired, not from lack of love, but from carrying everything on his shoulders without acknowledgement. Over time, he begins to shut down. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. At the same time, his partner might be withdrawing too, but in a different way. She may feel emotionally abandoned, unheard, or disconnected. Her attempts to reconnect might sound like complaints or criticism. But at the core, she's reaching out, and he's pulling away. This is how the cycle deepens. The more she pushes, the more he retreats. The more he retreats, the more she feels alone. Until one day, they're both living in the same house but feel like strangers. But here's the truth. Resentment is not permanent. It is reversible. The danger is not in the feeling itself. It's in ignoring it. Resentment grows in silence, but it heals in honesty. It takes courage to break the pattern, to have those uncomfortable but necessary conversations. To say, I feel unseen, or I need to know I still matter to you. It takes listening without getting defensive. It takes choosing to see your partner not as the enemy, but as someone who's also struggling, also yearning to be understood. The couples who thrive aren't the ones who avoid resentment. They're the ones who face it before it becomes a wall between them. They stay curious, they stay open, and they choose each other, even when it's hard. So ask yourself, is there something you've been carrying in silence? A frustration that's gone unspoken for too long? If so, it's not too late. Start the conversation. Lean in. Choose honesty over comfort. Because when you address resentment early, you don't just save your relationship, you deepen it. Coming up next, we'll explore the hidden role admiration plays in keeping attraction and connection alive, especially as years go by. Let's talk about something that often goes unnoticed in long-term relationships until it's too late. Admiration. It may not sound like a big deal, but for many men, admiration isn't just a nice bonus. It's a core emotional need. It fuels a man's drive, his sense of purpose, his very identity. When a man feels admired by the person he loves most, he stands taller. He strives harder. He feels seen. But here's what happens in many marriages, that admiration fades. Not because the man has changed, but because familiarity sets in. Things that once inspired praise now go unspoken. The sacrifices he makes, expected. The hard work, routine. Slowly, appreciation turns into assumption. And what once felt like meaningful effort begins to feel invisible. It's not about needing constant applause. It's about emotional feedback. Just like anyone else, men need to know they matter, that what they're doing makes a difference. When that recognition disappears, something deeper starts to shift. He may not say it out loud. He may not even realize it himself. But slowly, he begins to disengage. He stops sharing the small wins. He withholds his struggles. And eventually, he stops showing up fully, not out of spite, but out of quiet disillusionment. So where does he turn for validation? For some, it's work. For others, distractions. And in worst cases, it's found in places that threaten the foundation of the marriage. But the truth is, he was never looking for someone new. He was looking for someone who still sees him. Now here's the powerful part. This isn't irreversible. Admiration doesn't have to fade with time, but it does have to be intentional. Real admiration isn't flattery. It's not about ego stroking. It's about genuine acknowledgement. I see how hard you're trying. I'm proud of the way you handled that. These words carry weight. They remind a man that he's valued not just for what he provides, but for who he is. And it goes both ways. Just as men need to feel admired, women need to feel cherished, understood, and respected. Relationships thrive on mutual recognition. When both partners feel seen, heard, and appreciated, Emotional engagement stays alive. So ask yourself, when was the last time you looked at your partner not as who you expect them to be, but as the person they choose to be every day? When was the last time you voiced your admiration, not out of habit, but from the heart? Because admiration, when spoken sincerely, has the power to reignite connection, to rebuild trust, to transform quiet withdrawal into renewed intimacy. Coming. Up next, we'll dive into something just as vital, the role of shared purpose in keeping marriages vibrant, aligned, and full of meaning. Let's talk about something that quietly affects more marriages than people realize, something that doesn't come with a dramatic fight or sudden betrayal. It's the slow loss of shared purpose. In the early days of a relationship, there's usually a built-in sense of direction. You and your partner are building a life together. Maybe you're climbing the career ladder, buying a home, raising children, or just figuring things out side by side. There's a sense of progress, of momentum. Every challenge feels like something you're tackling together. And that shared mission? It naturally keeps the emotional connection alive, but then life evens out. Goals get checked off, careers stabilize, kids grow up, and without realizing it, the relationship shifts from building something together to simply maintaining what's already there. You go from being teammates on a mission to roommates managing logistics. And here's where the trouble creeps in. When that shared purpose fades, so does the sense of connection. For many men especially, this shift can feel deeply unsettling. Men are wired for mission, for direction, for something to strive toward. When that shared purpose disappears, they may begin to disengage, not necessarily because they don't love their partner, but because they no longer feel part of something meaningful together. It's not detachment out of coldness, it's detachment from a sense of direction. But here's the good news. This drift isn't irreversible. In fact, it can be a powerful wake-up call, an opportunity to pause and ask the question, what are we building now? Because that one question can completely reframe the relationship. It doesn't have to be a big life project. Maybe it's renovating a room together, planning long-term travel, volunteering for a cause you both care about, or simply committing to self-growth as a couple. What matters isn't the size of the goal, but that it's shared, intentional, and meaningful to both of you. When couples start building something together again, something shifts. You begin to see each other not just as partners in routine, but as co-creators of a vision. You start to admire one another's strengths again. Passion rekindles not through novelty, but through meaningful engagement. Respect and appreciation return, not because the past is forgotten, but because the future feels exciting again. And here's the truth. Purpose isn't about staying busy. It's about staying connected through movement, growth, and intention. A relationship without shared purpose slowly flattens. But a relationship with shared purpose? It thrives, even decades in. So if things have started to feel stale or distant, don't assume something is broken. Ask yourselves what you're building. Decide together what's next. And in doing so, you may find that the connection you thought was fading was just waiting to be reawakened through purpose. Because when two people continue to build, not just a life, but a vision, they don't just stay in love. They grow in it. Let's end with a truth that too many couples discover too late. Marriages don't fade because love disappears. They fade because intention does. Love alone is not enough to sustain a lifelong connection. It's not a magical force that maintains itself once the vows are said and the rings are on. What keeps a marriage thriving is what happens after the honeymoon phase, when life gets busy, when routines settle in, when familiarity replaces excitement. And in those moments, what matters most isn't whether you still love your partner. It's whether you still choose to engage with them on purpose. A thriving marriage is not about perfection or constant passion. It's about consistent presence. It's about admiration that is voiced, not assumed. It's about emotional engagement that doesn't wait for anniversaries or crises, but shows up in the little things. The way you listen, the way you notice, the way you support your partner not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to nurture what you've built together. Many men fall into a silent trap. They believe their role is simply to provide, to show up physically, to keep the machine of life running. But emotional absence in a relationship is just as harmful as physical absence. Your presence, your full, attentive, emotionally available presence, is a gift, and it's one your partner still needs, even decades in. So the real question isn't whether your marriage will last. The question is, will it thrive? Will you keep choosing each other when things feel ordinary? Will you keep building purpose, showing admiration, and leading with emotional responsibility? Because the difference between a marriage that fades and one that flourishes isn't about luck, it's about daily intention. It's about choosing, again and again, to stay present, curious, and committed. Not just to your partner, but to the space between you, the emotional bond you've built, and the one that still has room to grow. This is your invitation, not just to love your spouse, but to love them actively. To nurture the connection you share, to create rituals of appreciation, to make emotional engagement a daily practice, not a last resort, and most importantly, to take ownership of your role, not as a passive participant, but as a leader in your relationship. Because when a man leads with presence, when he commits not just to stay but to grow, something powerful happens. Respect deepens, intimacy returns, admiration flows both ways. And that connection, it doesn't just survive, it expands. So, if you've ever wondered why some marriages thrive while others slowly drift apart, now you know. It's not about whether you still love each other. It's about whether you're still showing it on purpose, and that is always a choice. If this message resonates, consider sharing it with someone who may need to hear it.